Welcome to our webinar, Digital Twins, the Legal Implications with Osborne Clarke. Delighted to be partnering with Osborne Clarke on this important and very topical subject. We've got experts from Osborne Clarke and we've got prop techs who are using digital twins in their solutions as well.
We're looking to advise our clients as their businesses, as our own does, undergoes substantial and essential period of change. And we want to work with our clients to break down the challenges in their business, the business is going to face in the future, and also collaborate with them as they plan for success. So our new strategy is based on 3 key transformation drivers, all of which overlap with the key messages that and key themes for the UK PA this year as well. So our themes are digitalization, decarbonisation, and what we call urban dynamics. And so that breaks down into the future of living, future of work, urban mobility, and smart cities as well. And so today we'll be talking about digital twins, as Sammy said, which for us sort of sits nicely at the intersection of digitalization and smart cities. A digital twin is a virtual model of something physical. And so the starting point is typically its physical shape. Data can then be layered into that model. And that might include how it moves, processes which it undertakes, how it performs, etc. It's not real estate centric, but it is becoming more and more prominent and prevalent in the real estate sector. And so real-time data about an asset, for example, sensors in-house or monitors or electricity usage from equipment can all be fed into the digital twin platform, so that it becomes a mirror of the physical things, of the built environment that you're building a twin of. So it can be used to monitor the actual asset, the actual physical property itself, to control, to manage it, and also assess the impact of changes before they actually occur or potentially occur in real life. And so that can be invaluable for all manner of reasons, particularly in the design and the planning stage, as you'll be able to hear from Alex at ViewCity a bit later on. And so it really can take the guesswork out of a lot of projects, a lot of real estate projects, particularly new builds, and remove potentially wasted or unwanted costs, having to sort of rip something up and start again if it wasn't fundamentally viable in the first place. So twins are essentially a data-rich, advanced application of IoT or Internet of Things technology. And so a sophisticated twin of a building, so of the built environment, will provide operators with intuitive, understandable, instantly available information about not only its operation, but also sort of granular operation events such as ventilation, efficiency of its air conditioning, status of its fire alarm systems, support framework, any compromised security systems, or even things as granular and detailed as level of pollutant at a time of day or depending on a certain amount of footfall. And so, as I said, twins are making waves in various industries, and slowly but surely they are taking center stage in real estate. And in the wake of digital transformation, digital twins are bringing immediate benefits to end users of buildings and providing return on investment for developers and investors as well. They can speed up decision making. So real-time data powers innovation and performance in a building. The design process can be improved. And so it's easier to run simulations and requirements, so based on spec and performance, that can be defined and quickly verified or validated. They bring an efficiency, so they can ensure a more effective and efficient process based on actual data and actual results, therefore saving potential cost. They optimize physical use, so looking at data from past and the present to educate the future, so things like predictive maintenance, for example. They can contribute heavily to sustainability. So a twin can facilitate processes around design, manufacture, and operation, essentially. And then in each of those processes, choices are made around sustainability and ESG. So for example, more efficient construction materials and construction logistics reduce CO2 emissions. Twins and associated data and processes also stimulate innovation within buildings as well. So you can play around with a digital twin to see what is in the art of the possible, and to help transform the mindset of that building or the operators of that building onto the customer. So by dealing with a property in a pretty holistic way, we go from a production mindset to a service mindset, and to the mindset where the experience and social value are central, and that creates endless possibilities.
This is a project which is run by the Centre for Digital Built Britain, and that's a partnership between the University of Cambridge and the government, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So it's a sort of quasi-official, and it's been described as an ecosystem of connected digital twins aiming to foster better outcomes for the built environment. What this is the idea is that the project's going to try and facilitate the bringing together of independent digital twins into a big network so that they can effectively better talk to each other, so that we'll get better outcomes for society, for business, for the country. And it's about setting up and enabling an infrastructure that can facilitate that happening in practice. So the National Digital Twin Programme is not in itself about it's not setting up digital twins as such, although it is involved in prototyping and so on. It's about facilitating all of the digital twins being set up, and then putting in place an infrastructure so they can talk to each other. So that's what it's about. So you can see immediately from that. But one of the things that's really crucial is interoperability of data, because it's all about data. It's all about the data that's coming off of the sensors in the building, and making that data available in a useful form, and facilitating exchange of data between where it's being produced and the people who need to use it. So one of the really important things that the National Digital Twin Programme is going to be aiming to do is setting up a comprehensive information management framework to enable this connection. And so it's going to be setting out technical standards, processes, and a framework so that there's going to be able to be really secure, resilient communication of data between what's envisaged to be this network of digital twins. What the Digital Twin Programme decided was, at quite an early stages, that the legals are going to be really crucial on this, and that it's very important to start thinking about that really early on, before too many of the aspects of the programme get baked in, and then we have to try and sort out the legals later. So what they did late last year is convened an expert group of lawyers. We all gave our time for free, seeing as it's a for the public good project. And we had a series of meetings, virtually of course, to try and cover off some of the key legal aspects. So the legal aspects that are relevant to a law of construction, financial regulation, energy, planning, insurance, IT law, funding and finance, and intellectual property and data privacy. And that was the input that I was provided. Just broadly speaking, the issues of intellectual property, data and access were thought to be an absolutely critical part of it, and the overarching arrangements of that were going to be crucial to the success or otherwise of this project. And there needs to be structure around it that's thought about at the outset, and so that we're thinking about ownership of intellectual property, rights to use the intellectual property, and the contractual frameworks that will enable that to happen in the right sort of way. Going to be copyrights, and there'll be copyright in software, in documentation, There will be in things like architectural drawings and the plans and designs, of course, as well. But specific to the digital twin and the data throwing out, database rights are going to be important. That's a little bit like copyright, but more likely to be applicable here in all the data. There'll be confidential information in the data, very importantly. A lot of this is not going to be otherwise available to the public, and so there'll be rights of confidence in it. And there's also potentially going to be things like more hard IP, like patents might be involved. So there's quite a broad range of IP, but I think things like copyright, database rights, confidential information are going to be really central to it. Who owns the IPR? Not just in the systems that allow communications, but in the actual data that is flowing out of these systems. And the default position for IPR ownership most of the time is going to be whoever actually created it will be the owner. So the person who sat there and typed the code, created the databases or invested in them, generally speaking, they're going to be the owners as a default. It's a bit more complicated than that for database rights, but I won't go into that. So if the default is that it's owned by whoever created it, then if you want to change that position, then your contract needs to spell that out. And the contracts also need to spell out not just who owns all the intellectual property, but who has the rights to use it, what purposes they can use it for, what restrictions are going to be placed around that use. And so you can see that basically contracts become extremely important in all of this. You know, the general message of not just with digital twins, but with any project of this kind is you can't just rely on having intellectual property rights and then doing what you want them to do, depending on which side of the contract you're on. You actually need a contract that sets out what you actually want to happen, so that it's all, as far as it can be, it's clear in advance. The difficulty with intellectual property law is that intellectual property law varies from country to country. So we can all talk about what the UK law says about things, but really with multinational, international supply chains for various aspects of projects, with data being hosted abroad, or those sorts of things, we also need to look to international aspects as well. It's not just a UK situation for intellectual property, albeit that the contracts usually are under English law. The other issues that were raised about were to what extent the government or some other quasi-official body needs to get involved to provide some kind of overarching possibly ownership of IP, or it might be a body which sets out how it has to be licensed if you're taking part in a digital twin project, or it might be being the counterparty to some of those contracts and being the sort of the honest broker in the middle of it. There's also the question of IPR in relation to data standards. So as I mentioned, putting in place standards for sharing data is going to be really important if any of this is going to work. And there's also questions of, well, who owns the IPR in the standards, who administers them, who sets out what the licensing terms are under which people can share data, and all of that. I think we all got the impression that that's going to eventually lead towards there being some kind of third-party body sitting in the middle of all of this to make it work. Contractual frameworks and collaboration agreements are absolutely at the heart of all of this. The risks and liabilities and responsibilities have got to be clearly mapped out. You've got to balance future-proofing your contracts versus getting your contracts signed in good time to just get on with your commercial imperatives. You've got to make sure your contracts allow for as much as you can, whilst knowing that there is uncertainty in the future, particularly for these very long-term contracts. You're going to have to cover off who will own things, who will have the rights to use them. And as usual from lawyers, it's really important to try and start thinking about the legal issues as soon as you can, because it's going to save a lot of time, cost, stress and tears further down the line.
The platform is a game-changing platform, really, in the industry, and it's kind of driving our quite traditional analog linear industry of master planning into the kind of new world of digital 3D visualization using some really interesting game engine technology. So I'll show you a few examples of that. But effectively, many tech companies are starting on the right-hand side here at micro level, at individual building scale. The difference here with VueCity is that we started at macro scale on the left-hand side. So we model complete cities across the UK and overseas. And the starting point, obviously, is you can then start to look at the city as a whole and then drill down into the detail, master planning, borough-wide, street-wide, and then build individual buildings. So effectively, a digital twin to help policymakers at macro scale, but also master planners and developers designing individual buildings as well. These are the sorts of things you will be able to do in terms of looking at the functionality. But effectively, we can fly around the city at any level at height and look at our model, or we can get down at street level, and you can see the different levels of modeling detail here. This is LOD, what we call level of detail 3, which is standard. And then you can start to look at extruding buildings using the game engine technology and looking at massing very quickly of buildings. And the digital twin aspect is the timeline, effectively. So we can roll time backwards and forwards and look at planning applications in yellow, consented schemes, and those that are being built in blue as well. We're moving from these 2D maps to, in a 3D world, to the kind of the whole interactive 3D model amongst cities, where they can look at their mobility, their operations, their real estate, their utilities. And effectively, this is where the VueCity platform has come from and is now driving and hopefully influencing our industry going forwards.
So this image I'll put on the screen here for you that talks about My Hub. A few years ago, we realized when we were doing the BIM thing that BIM was obviously the way forward. This was it. But even when government mandated it, it was difficult to try and find somebody, unless the client stipulated it, was prepared to pay for it. It would go around the houses and it wasn't my budget, it wasn't my budget, I didn't want to do it, whose budget's going to do it, why are we going to bother? And we've got exactly the same thing with digital twins. When somebody says it's £300,000 for a digital twin, everybody takes a step back from the table, nobody wants to pay for it. So what we did with this image is we thought if your digital twin was to sit in the middle in the hub, in the management information hub, and if you could then talk to the BIM team, the health and safety team, the FM team, the space planning team, the sales team, the community app team, then actually you end up with a whole bunch of stakeholders that might be prepared to contribute towards this centralized digital twin. You didn't suddenly hit the IT team with it. You didn't hit estates with it. You actually went out to everybody from the construction team right the way through to the handover team, and you could share the costs and share the benefits between people. So we call it My Hub. So just keep that in mind. One way of making digital twins appealing to people is to make them visual, and we've always been really strong on making things visual. If you can make it pretty and engaging, you've won half of the battle. So this is on BT's Tech Park. So you can see that the digital twin is a pretty low fidelity digital twin, but it clearly looks like the real thing. And we've got these dashboards going on. So if I look over here and you can see my energy consumption, a really neat and easy thing, if I click on 3D, just chops the building up, just puts it into 9 layers. And I can immediately see what's going on down here. Why is there a potential brownout in the basement? It's normally where the servers are, it's normally where the plant is. Simple things like available car parking. So using ANPR or using sensors in the ground, obviously it's sped up, but you can see now where you've got 2 distinct parts of the estate teams thinking, hey, these digital twins are pretty cool. They've got a use. By BT, bless them, interested in where people are sitting, As Alex was saying, we can go from the macro right down to the micro, where you can actually be looking at desk utilization. And you can imagine in today's world how that's going to be really important as we go back to work, and there'll be all sorts of issues going around space and utilization. Digital twins have real benefit. They don't need to be expensive, but they can bring massive features and benefits to the users across all of those spokes. If you remember back to that hub, all of those spokes on that hub can really benefit from a well thought out and cost effective digital twin plan. So that's it, really.
The legal issues are undeniably complex, but it's no excuse to stray away from them. Lots of big projects have complex legal issues. They can all be dealt with, and it just comes back down to what I said earlier. The earlier you get the lawyers involved, even if it's just for an initial view, doesn't need to be sort of necessarily full blown at the outset. But as soon as you've got some kind of legal input, we can identify the key areas where there are legal risks. Perhaps create a roadmap for what is going to need to be done going forwards in a prioritized kind of way, just so that we can steer around any massive legal pitfalls in advance, rather than trying to patch it up later on, which is always a lot more time and hassle.
Adoption is really interesting, actually, in take up of digital twins, and I think there's two things. One is fear, and as you say, case studies and misunderstanding and not realizing what you can do, and also not really realizing what's out there in the marketplace. There are a lot of companies out there doing this already, and there are other industries doing this already, and the construction industry is following. But I also think sometimes there is a little bit of restraint from adopting, because there's a lot of protectionism of the current way of doing, the traditional way of doing work and consultancy. And really what we're doing is we're disrupting here. We're only doing this to disrupt things, to make it more efficient and quicker and speedier. And I think that sometimes people are slightly fearful of challenging the normal way of doing things. So that's affecting some adoption. But when people see use cases, they really get it, and both in the public sector and the private sector, we're seeing a good uptake now.
The value is obviously in data. It's not just in commercialization, as in charging people to use some of your data or something derived from it. It's also about primarily often about enabling efficiencies, new lines of business, etc., within your own organization, and having an overview of what's going on and facilitating developments as much as the actual can you put an external price on it.
There's some points where you can easily put a value on the digital twin for the cost of you trying to recreate it at the time of need arises. So the two parts of the question could be about trying to put a value on the data that might be held in the digital twin, or the actual value of the digital twin. I would suggest that the industry cost of trying to work out how much cladding it has up and down the country puts a pretty well defined figure on what the cost and the value of a digital twin should be.